Hello and welcome back. We are now going to begin in earnest on our modeling project for the Battlestar Galactica Mark 7 Viper. Now, once again, I do have several different images that have been scoured off of the internets that I'll be using from time to time. Most of the time when I refer to these, they'll be off screen and I may pull them over just to point something out. Please understand that I cannot redistribute these images because they are not mine to give you. I'm simply using them for reference as a part of this video. But they were extremely easy to find. If you really are just having an impossible time finding them, please consider making a forum post over on 3D Buzz, and I'm sure that we can find a way to track them down pretty quickly. So let's start off with simple stuff, and then we'll just kind of go from there. Because when you're handling something like this, and I don't care if it's a game model or a TV production or a film production model, the first thing you should do as a decent modeler is to break down the order in which you want to handle this. I would advise against trying to just dive in without any kind of a game plan as to what you're going to model. And what I like to do is to break every model I do down into bite-sized parts that are in and of themselves very simple to knock out. It gives you a nice kind of a victory dance. You get something done, you're like, oh yeah, that worked out great, now I'm ready to tackle the next thing, because you feel good. You feel like you're making progress and moving forward. So what I'm going to do is start off right back here with what's going on at the rear fuselage. And if we back up, I think there's a really good picture of it. Just this area back here. It's a very simple shape. We're going to get that knocked out. I will be modeling this ship out in several different pieces that will all be part of the same polygon object. It's a very convenient way to model, and it's even how this was modeled for the TV version as well. We're just going to make use of it. Now, there will be some things we will try to avoid that do happen inside the TV model. I can point them out to you. Not that they didn't matter on TV, and they probably wouldn't matter in a game either, but I did stumble across them while digging through these images, and I just thought it's kind of interesting. The renderer that they used to make this only renders the positive side of the polygons, and there's a couple of places, like right here, check it out, where you can see through to the outside world. So you can tell that the underside of the fuselage down here was just a one-sided polygon, because now we can see out here in space. And there's a couple of other parts where that same sort of thing happens. What concerns me is if this wasn't a game where you could, as the player, rotate and pan around completely at will whenever you so desired. It's possible, and here's another example, that someone might end up seeing some of these. So we're going to try to keep this as solid as we can. Now, when I say solid, I don't necessarily mean that this whole thing is going to be one contiguous piece of polygonal geometry. We're just going to try to keep there from being a whole lot of holes. Okay, now, first off, this cube that we created in the last video, this was really just here for us to line up our image planes and make sure everything was good to go. But we don't need it anymore. So the first thing is just to hit the X key and make this go away. Which, I mean, of course, makes this look like it's a brand new scene, but as we all know, if we take a look at our various views, we do have something to work from here. Now, I'm going to start off by creating, well, let me say this. There's a couple of different ways we could start out. We could start off with the traditional box model, which of course would be just fine. Which that means we start off by bringing in a box or cube, and then we just start reshaping the vertices that are there. We start adding in edge loops into that box, and gradually turn that into whatever shape we're chasing. I do a lot of that. I box model a lot of things because it's a great way to get started with an object that is already symmetrical and ready to rock. I'm going to do something a little different in this case, though. We're going to begin with a plane and just kind of start shaping that. It's kind of like creating our own custom polygon. We'll just start with a single four-sided polygon, and we'll perform a variety of edge extrusions to create the shape that we are looking for. So let's go to Add, drop in a mesh, and bring in a plane. Now I'm going to hit the N key to put away this bar here on the right-hand side of my viewport. I just don't particularly need it right now. I'm going to change the name of this plane to Viper Body, so we can see that. I can rotate around this plane, and of course right now it looks nothing like our little colonial Viper. I'm going to lift it up and slide it backwards a little bit. Even though I cannot see my images, you have to remember the reason we set up our image planes the way we did is because that y-axis always points forward. So we automatically, without seeing the image planes, know what's forward and we know what's backward, which is great. Now with this in place, so we got our name, I'm going to go ahead and jump under the Modifiers tab, and we're going to add on a Symmetry modifier, or a Mirror modifier. Now I'm going to turn on clipping as well. Now if I hit tab, you see these start to kind of spread out. What I'm going to do is stretch this out like so. So you notice how clipping, because I switched on the clipping checkbox, it keeps this locked together here at the center. Because I did that, I now have a nice seam. So you just kind of slide out, let go of your mouse, and then slide back in, and you've created a nice center line that now can't get all messed up on you. Now with that done, let's hit Control. Actually, before I even do that, let's make sure I'm selecting vertices. So hit Control Tab, hit V for vertices, and I'll grab these two outer verts, and I'm just going to slide them down a little bit. The only reason I'm doing this is so that when I hit Control 3 and look in the side view, I can see the difference from one vertex to the next. That's really the only reason I'm doing that. Let's hit B, and actually, let me deselect everything, then hit B, grab these verts back here, and I'm going to make this whole thing pretty short. And I'll hit A a couple of times to select everybody, and I'm just going to pull this right over here. Now, this shape that we're creating, though it is very simple, it does have some nice curvature to it. I mean, you see it arcs back over the back of the ship. There's even, if you look really close, some kind of an indentation right here over the back. If I switch over to a top view, you can see where that indentation is. We are not going to be worried about modeling in that indentation. We're just going to leave that out as kind of a modeling decision. That's something that we could handle simply in the texture to save just a few precious polygons. But what we'll do for starters is just start grabbing some vertices and moving them around. I implore you, especially if you're relatively new to modeling, do not be afraid to just move vertices around. Don't be afraid to just start slinging stuff. You can't really break this. You can't really go wrong at this stage. Anything that you, and I could use finger quotes, anything you quote mess up, you could always fix later. So don't be shy because you're just slowing yourself down. So I'm going to jump over to the, well, I don't really want the back view. Let's go with the front view. So Control 1. And we can see that we can start kind of bringing these down and setting them more or less right here on the surface. Now, obviously, we're losing some detail. You can see that this shape is very straight, and we need a little more rounding across the top. Don't worry about that just yet. We'll get there, one thing at a time. Now, I'm going to hit Control-Tab and hit E for edges. I'm going to grab this edge here on the outside. Let's also hit Control-1 and go back to a front view. I'm going to hit the E key to extrude. Click. And the E key again to extrude. Click. And you see, all I've just done is I've really roughed out that shape. In fact, if we rotate around it, you can already see where this is kind of a rough version of exactly the shape that we need. Now, to kind of complete it, let's grab these three edges here along the front, and we'll switch over to the left view, Control 3. And I'm just going to hit Extrude just one time, and we'll pull this forward like so. Now, before we start adding a whole bunch of detail, we need to take just a few minutes and start cleaning up the detail that we have. So Control-Tab, V, switch over to vertices, and just start positioning these guys. If you would like, if you prefer working this way, and I do, hit the Z key so you can go into wireframe. Now, as you get deeper into modeling, especially if you're modeling something like this, you may find yourself wanting to align various edges of your model to some of the line and the little indentations and grooves that you see on this actual model. You can do that if you really, really want to. I would recommend that you do not, however, and here's why. One, all of this is texturing anyway. I mean, if you're doing a super high-res version that you're going to be putting the camera right down on the surface and maybe showing somebody putting their cheek against it or a bug crawling across it, then it would be more important to get all that kind of stuff modeled out. But this stuff would work just as well for our purposes of a game model as just being a texture that had a little bit of a bump map and some specularity mapping and whatnot. And I can prove to you that that's how they did it for the actual TV show as well. I mean, you can see here all of this great groove and paneling work. Like, this was actually put together from a whole bunch of little tiny artisan panels. But if you take a look here, check this out. It's just one consistent static piece. And that's the way we want to model it. Now, if you've been modeling for a while, you're probably going like, yes, Zach, I realize this. But again, I'm trying to keep this geared toward a little bit more of a beginner modeler, just for now. Though you won't be a terrible beginner once you get done here. All right, now you see what I'm doing. I'm just tracing out the shape so far. And it's very simple. There's a few hard edges, but for right now, that's okay. And then you rotate around to the side, see what this is starting to look like. Also, be sure you hit Control 1 and take a look from the front. These vertices back here at the front are looking very good. They're pretty much right where we need them to be. These, however, need to be dragged in. Now, in the left view, we got these vertices here and here set up exactly where they need to be from the left view. So here, all we need to do is move them just in the x-axis so that we don't screw up what we did in the left-hand view. So I'll pull that in. I'll pull this in. This guy I can probably also pull in as well, but I think I'm going to just consider pulling him down a little ways. We need a little more rounding right in here. So how are we going to do that? Well, I'll get out here to kind of a perspective view where we can see a little better, and I'll hit Control R, and this is going to allow us to put in an edge loop. We can click and then slide the mouse to wherever we want it to be. I'll put it right about the center. If you don't want to worry about having to guess where the center is at this point, just right-click the mouse, and that'll automatically set that right to the center for you. Now let's hit Control 1 to go back to the front view. We can lift this up, and you can see how that already starts to get that looking very, very nice. So let's click out here in space. I'm going to hit B, select these verts, and maybe drag them down a little bit. And we can also go over to the left view, which is, again, Control 3. As we get deeper and deeper into this, I will stop calling out the keys that I'm hitting on the numpad to move us around. So if you need to take a moment and kind of practice using those so that you know you're nice and comfortable with just jumping between views, I highly recommend that you do that. Okay, looking pretty nice so far. Let's hit Control-Tab-E for edges. Now if I hit Alt and click on one of these edges, that's going to grab all of these edges here along the back. Again, that's the Alt key, and then clicking on one of these edges. Now let's hit E for extrude, and I'll pull this way back to about here at the end of our little tail fin. And I'll take just a moment, Control-Tab-V, and start cleaning up the vertices. Now this shape does get a little complex here. There's like a little dip off that kind of rotates around. We are not going to be dealing with that to such a high degree of curvature. Not for a game model. There's just no need. What we've already got going on is going to be able to get the job done very well. Let's take a look at how this looks from the top view, actually. Let's hit the 7 key, and you'll notice that we're already kind of starting to fall away. Here, along the very top, we're looking pretty good, all things considered. I mean, these little tiny discrepancies of just a few pixels don't really alarm me very much at all. In fact, they look great. This is still looking pretty good, but you'll notice the further back we get, we start to kind of fall away from what the front view can see, and it becomes a lot more difficult, even just in the rear view, to gauge where these vertices should be because the shape is pointed right at us. So what I'm going to do is just start adjusting these from the top view. I'll pull this in, I'll pull this in, and then we'll pull this in, and I'll kind of back out a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. Now, I am using these lines, these textured lines, as a little bit of a reference here. I'm cheating with them just a little bit. See, I can see that this vertex is in just so many pixels, inches, however you want to visualize that, away from that edge. So I pull this one a relative amount inside as well because the whole shape is tapering as you go backward. So we're just kind of using that to our advantage. Likewise, this vertex here is just a few pixels in from this line up here. I need to make sure it's also just a few pixels in back here as well. And then we just line this up with the base of the shape. And as we rotate around, we're starting to get that. Now, there is a point where common sense or just kind of poking around, rotating from to various views is going to have to dictate the shape. And here's what I'm talking about. We've actually created a little bit of an indentation back here at the back. We didn't mean to, it's just it looked right in the viewports but doesn't look right here. So at some point just, rotate around, take a look at it in free perspective view, and adjust accordingly to what looks right. Because it can line up in the viewports all day long and still look terrible when you're done. Just remember, in the end, it has to look good. So make whatever adjustments are necessary to make sure that it just looks good. So we'll round that out a little more. And I'm going to go ahead and tweak these out just a little bit as well. So I have some nice rounding here as well, just so everything seems to flow. And what you want, what I mean when I say flow is that I want these edges, these lines, to feel like a nice smooth transition. I don't want it to look like, well, this edge angles down a little up to this point, then it goes up a little bit. That's not good flow. I want, if this was just a regular shape, I want to be able to run a marker along its surface in a line that flowed along that surface and have that line look nice and straight. So to do that, I got to make sure that my polygon edges have a nice path between them. That's what I mean when I say flow. And so far this is looking pretty good. So now let's jump back over to our side view. And we'll hit Control Tab, E. I'm going to hold down Alt and click these back edges. Let's hit E one more time for extrusion. And I'm going to pull back to about here. Let's also hit the Z key so we can see through everything. And we can just start getting this kind of lined up. So let's hit Control Tab, V for vertices. Pull this to about here. Pull this back. Pull this back and set this guy on top. So about like so. We may want to actually pull that up a little more. Maybe pull this guy up. So we're going to be doing a little bit of interpretation on that shape. Now we could probably use a little more rounding here in this area. In fact, if we did put maybe an edge here and an edge here, we could get a little more of that lip where this sort of starts to descend down, which could be useful later on. I can always remove it later if I change my mind. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to hit Control R, click, and we'll place one edge about here. And then we'll just start using those vertices to kind of round things out a little bit. As soon as you drop in an edge, it's good practice to go ahead and clean up what those new vertices are doing. So we'll go ahead and taper these in the top view. And I should have done that with these back vertices first before I added this in. So I'm paying the price now with a little bit more work to do, but that's okay. Okay, and so far that's looking pretty good. Now let's get these all tapered in as well. So we can taper and we can kind of outline this sort of cap-like shape back here at the back. And maybe something about like that. And maybe pull these out and get that flow. Because what I had here's what I had a second ago, and you can see how the edges don't flow. They sort of change direction right there. And that's not what I'm looking for. I want nice, smooth topology. And maybe just pull this guy up and in just a little bit. Okay, let's hit Control 3. This is looking pretty good so far. Let's hit Z to go back into wireframe view. We'll hit Control R to add in another edge. Click once, drop him in right about here. And see, it's not going to give us this really nice curvature that you see in the actual video model, but it's enough to get us started where we want to be. Just pull that up and get just a little more of that curvature pushed upward through there, and like so. Alright, now I need to clean up what's going on in the back. And in order to do that, I'm going to start off by solidifying the view, just to make this a little easier for everybody to see. And I want to grab edges, so set Control Tab E to grab edges. I want this edge here, and I'll hit the E key to extrude, and this is going to just kind of moving in all different directions. That's okay. In fact, let me right click, and then I'll just pull this straight down. That'll probably be a whole lot easier for me. Now I'm going to hit S for scale, Z for the Z axis, and I'm just going to pull that to where it's pretty much flat. And we'll slide it back a little. Now if you take a look at what we have here, we've got 1, 2, 3 edges on this shape out here. So I'm going to hit Control R, and then once I've hit that, I'm going to roll up on the mouse wheel so that I'm going to add 3 new edges, like so. Now, set Control Tab V for vertices. We'll grab this vertex, hold down Shift, grab this vertex. Alt M for merge. So Alt M. And we'll say at last. Click here and here. It looks like I actually made one too many. That's what I get. So Alt M at last. Oh, make sure I just get the one. So U and U, Alt M at last. Now this gives us an extra polygon. I really didn't need to create 3, I only needed to create 2, but you know, that's okay. Let's hit Control Tab, Faces, click X. Oh, not vertices. X, and I click Faces. I just want that face gone. Now I'm just going to switch over to vertices. So Control Tab V, and I'll just start sliding these down. You see, by doing this, I've just kind of capped off the surface, and I've given us the detail that we need so that we can come over here and start creating this kind of rounding. So let's hit Z, go back into wireframe view. Put that right about here. Maybe go ahead and pull this out just a little more. Put this right about here. And let's take a look from the top. Not too bad, but it'd probably look a little nicer if we had just a little more detail to aid in the overall sense of rounding. I don't want to add too much more detail than we've got, but it will probably help us. So here's how I want to do that. Let's hit Control Tab F to grab faces. I want these 3 faces. Can I get that face too? That'd just be swell. Alright. And I'm going to hit E to extrude, and I'll pull these out just a little bit, and then I'll hit S to scale them down a little bit. Now, that will give us an edge back here that I don't necessarily, or a face, excuse me, down here that I don't necessarily want right now. So I'm going to hit X and delete out that face. And then I'm just going to start moving these around. So Control Tab E for edges. I'm going to slide this back down like so. We'll slide this down like so. And you see that just gives us a little more detail that we can use for the purposes of controlling that rounding. So let's hit Control Tab V for vertices. And I'm just going to start positioning these guys around a little bit. So I'm backing them away from the edge so that I can use this next set of vertices to really start getting that rounding in place. I had to undo that. Deselect here so I can round this out a little bit. And we'll just slide this forward. And this we could probably slide up a little ways. And if we take a look in the rear view, we can see how far. So we kind of need to pull that up and pull this up as well. Now this is one of those areas where you can kind of see where it would be nice to be able to, let me kind of close that up. It'd be nice if we could have just a little more detail there for the rounding. So I'm going to do a couple of things here. We can also get an idea of the actual shape that I should be going for, so I'm going to make a few adjustments to how this looks. Let's pull this up just a hair. Actually, I'm going to pull this back down just a little bit. Okay. It's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to do something just a little bit fancy here. Not too fancy. Let's hit Control Tab F. I'm going to grab this face right here, hit X, and delete it. Then I'm going to hit Control R to add in a new edge right here. I'll right click to leave it in the center. Hit Control Tab to grab vertices. I can use this new vertex to round this out a little more, make that look a little nicer. Now over here, I'm going to switch over to edges, Control Tab E, grab an edge and an edge, hit F to fill in, grab an edge and an edge, F to fill in. Makes a little triangle back there, but that's perfectly alright. Now if we get out of wireframe view, we can see that there's a little bit of tweakage required here. So we can kind of round this out. Really all I'm doing is just looking at this from multiple directions to make sure the rounding looks good. I can probably pull this out a little for some rounding. Yeah, that's looking pretty nice. Let me go ahead and smooth everything out. So if I hit Tab to get out of edit mode, I can hit smooth, and overall that doesn't look bad at all. But then if I hit Tab again, you can do something that's very handy. You can model here on the left-hand side, but take a look at what's going on the right to see how your shape actually looks when it's shaded. Very useful technique if you can manage working on one side while kind of looking at the other. I'll leave that up there where it was. Now, let me take a look from the side view here, hit Z. We're a little bit far out. So what I'm going to do is grab these verts, slide them back here, pull these back like so. I think that's looking pretty good. Okay, now there were a few more things I wanted to do to the front of this shape, and then we can probably call it right about here. I'm going to hit Control R and add another edge loop up here toward the front, and use this to start bringing in a greater sense of thickness for this shape. Now let's take a look from the top. Slide those back, just kind of straighten things up a little. These can come out just a little ways. Okay. Now let's switch over to edges, so Control Tab E, and I'm just going to grab all of these, hit E, and then it doesn't really matter where I go. Let's just go ahead and pull them right about to here, and really all that's doing is just adding a nice sense of thickness right there. But let's switch over to the front view, and I'm going to place all of these vertices just underneath the darkened edge here. So it'll start to give it that sense of thickness that we need. Now, let's take a look from the side view, and we can see that these can all be slid backwards. What I'm going to do is just kind of line them up with the front edge that's already there. Now let's grab all those edges again, so Control Tab E, hold down Alt, and we'll grab like so, hit E and slide back a little bit, and that's just adding a little more of that thickness. And then we can clean this up, so Control Tab V and pull this vertex away so it doesn't re-protrude back through itself. And overall, I think that's looking pretty good. Now, I'm going to hit Control Tab E to grab edges once again. We're going to grab these two edges, these leading edges, on the inside of our shape. I'm going to extrude these straight across, and you see how they kind of meet in the middle automatically? That's extremely useful. I love that little technique. Now, let's hit Control Tab F to grab faces. I'll grab these faces, hit S for scale, hit Y for the Y-axis, and shrink that down. In fact, let's go way out here and do it again. So S and Y, and that's just flattening these guys out. Once they are flattened out, we can slide them back a little further, like so. Then, Control Tab E for edges, grab this edge here at the very top, in fact, just so you can see which one it is, and this edge here, hit F to fill that in, and now we have a nice solid shape. The only other thing I might do, and this is kind of contingent on what this looks like, if I pull back to here and we hit Smooth, that's actually not half bad. I mean, I'd be interested in launching into an argument with somebody as to whether or not I need one more little edge of beveling right along here. I'm tempted to put it in. I can always remove it later if I just absolutely have to. Right now we're sitting at 98 faces overall, and my goal is to have this done in 3 to 5,000. Let me go ahead and add it in, and then if I don't like it or if I find that I need to start removing, then that'll be a simple one to pull out later on. So let's jump into the side view and hit Z. And I really would love it if Blender had Maya's Bevel operation or 3ds Max's chamfer operation, but since it doesn't, and since I don't really want to, complain too much, I'm going to hit Control R, and we'll add in an edge right about here, like so. And then I'm going to hold down Alt and click on this guy. And then, let's see, if we hit... Oh, I didn't mean to hit Extrude, so let me undo that. Let's hit Control E, and we have Edge Slide, and I'm going to slide this back. And that's not quite a bevel, but it's pretty close. Pretty close indeed. So we just smooth that out one more time to be sure. And there we go. We have our first piece modeled out and looking very nice. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap the video up here for the time being. And in the next video, we will move on to some other components of our Viper. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.